I'm going to move into now the FrameSync portion of the demo. So I know we've been getting a lot of questions on FrameSync. It seems people are starting to try to use it and wondering how. So hopefully we can answer some of those questions and make it a bit clearer. So first, what is FrameSync? Essentially, FrameSync's a technology we've built into the Vortex. It's also in the SpaceX and the Micro, but the Vortex has got the fastest and the best implementation of FrameSync that can shoot at the highest speeds. But it allows you to synchronize the camera shutter to the fixture so they're lock in step. And why would you want to do this? There's two kind of main reasons. The first one is preventing torn frames. So if you're using a camera that's got a rolling shutter and you have a strobing light source, then you can end up with a torn frame where half the frame's lit and half the frame's dark. It looks ugly, so FrameSync allows you to make sure that any flashes or changes in the light output are exactly synchronized with the shutter. And the second and kind of more exciting application is where you can do frame accurate strobing. So you can have, say, one frame on, one frame off, or two frames of one color and then have a different color on a different fixture. Or you can sequence them to, an array to shoot kind of like a motion sequence. So those are the two applications. What it's not for, it's not necessary for just general high-speed shooting. So there's been a little confusion, do I need FrameSync if I'm just shooting high speed? You don't. It's got nothing to do with the flicker effect that you might get when you're shooting it on high speed. If you want to shoot, like steady shots, not flashing, but just continuous light source on high speed, then you just need to make sure the fixture's in high speed mode. So I just want to make that clear. There's no relation between FrameSync and shooting high speed. What I'm going to do now is we'll walk through a torn frames demo where I'll show what happens. We've got a Phantom Flex camera here, and we'll link that up and run some strobing effects without FrameSync and have a look at how that looks. So Nathan, can you set up? I think we'll shoot 200 frames a second, 180 on the Phantom.
180 degrees shutter.
180 degrees shutter.
Yep.
Yeah. And can you come in, Chanel? So for this, I'm going to just shoot like a burst strobe sequence. We've got no sync connected between the fixture and the Creamsource, so I'm just going to run a strobe effect here. And are you good to capture?
I'm good to trigger, yeah.
Okay, so we'll just capture some footage. Can you?
Yep, I'm capturing about a second of that.
Okay, cool. We'll stop that. And we'll just play this back.
I'll play it back at 25 frames. But I'll go through frame by frame. Maybe we can find it.
Yeah.
Torn frame, I guess. There you go, this one straight up.
So here you can see there's half the frame's lit and half the frame's dark.
That's a good example, actually.
Yeah.
That's
So depending on the camera sensor, how fast it scans the sensor, this effect can look really, really obvious. Like you'll have a hard break or a little bit of a softer break here.
That's obviously because it's a rolling shutter.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So rolling shutter, it actually takes a finite amount of time to scan from the top of the sensor to the bottom. If the light changes in that time, you end up with the broken frame. So what we'll do now is we're going to connect sync. So over on the Phantom, this is one of the easiest ones to connect to a Vortex because it's actually got a sync output. So here on, we're using the mini breakout box, it's called, which gives you access on the aux 1 port here to what they call a strobe signal, which is essentially it goes high and low when the shutter's open or closed. So on the menu here, you have to actually enable that output, which is under the camera menu, aux 1, and we change that to strobe. So now I'm going to connect the BNC cable, which is coming from our aux 1 port on the camera, and that's going over here to the Vortex. And we're going to take that into the accessories port using the accessory BNC adapter cable. It's a Creamsource product. It's just got a BNC connector on one end and the accessories connector on the other. So that goes in there, and this is the BNC cable out from the camera. Connect them, and now on the back of the unit, we have the green bars come up showing 200 frames a second, which is what we're set on the camera. So you can see if I remove sync, we're going to lose that green bar, connect it back again, we have sync. Might just pull up a slide showing that, what that setup looks like, just so you can see. So we have the camera sync out through the little BNC adapter cable straight into the back of the Vortex. And there's no settings you need to do on the Vortex. It automatically will detect sync. But what we do need to do is to calibrate the Vortex to the camera. So we need to do this because the strobe sync that comes out of the camera is actually tells us when the shutter's first opening, but the Vortex needs to know when the shutter's closed, and that might change depending on what shutter angle you're shooting. So we need to do this calibration step, which is as simple as pointing the fixture directly at the camera. So we'll just frame that up so we've got a full the full set of LEDs visible in the screen. And then
So it has to be full frame of LEDs, doesn't it?
yeah, you want to be able to see the important part is at the top of the frame and the bottom of the frame can both see the LEDs. Doesn't really matter left and right so much. We're shooting here on the full sensor,
Yeah.
so we're using the whole,
All the pixels.
all the pixels. So on the Vortex, go across to Calibrate Sync mode. Select that. The LEDs are now flickering at 200 frames a second. I should just also note that we're in high-speed mode on the fixture. So under fixture settings, we're in high-speed mode because we're shooting high speed. So that should always be on. So now, as I change the sync phase, we get this weird effect. And actually what's happening here, the lights are just flickering at 200 frames. As I adjust the phase, it's adding a little delay between when it receives the sync pulse from the camera and when it flashes the LED. So, and what you're seeing on the screen is actually that's the scan. Basically, you're seeing the sensor being scanned. At some point, the light's turning off while the sensor's being scanned, and that's why you can see those bars. So for calibration, you want to get the full frame black. You can see if I keep turning the sync, we actually go past the point. But as long as the top and the bottom, the whole frame is black, then you're in sync. And you can then use any of the effects either on the Vortex, like the built-in effects, or you can be controlling it from a console, and you can be safe that you're not going to tear a frame. If you're doing a multiple setup, you only need to do this on the first head. But you do need to do it if you change the shutter speed and if you change the shutter angle, then you need to check your calibration again. There is, yep, and I'll get into that in the next little piece. I'll show you how to do a setup of 2 and 4 fixtures, which can then be scaled up to, I think we safely do about 32 on one DMX line. No, only if the settings have changed. Okay. So you don't need to, if you pull sync, for example, then you don't need to recalibrate. It's only if either the frame rate or the shutter angle have changed. We'll just reshoot that little strobe sequence.
So it's still at 200 frames and 180 degrees shutter.
Yep.
We'll just calibrate it now. The head to the sensor.
Okay, so we're going to run.
So I'll just get that. I'll just capture that.
It's a bit bright for 5 in the morning, but.
Apply that back to 25 frames a second to start off with. I'll go through frame at a time. So what's that? That's 1 on.
This is just a random sort of strobe effect, so it's not going to be, we're not using the sync frames effect.
So it's just looking at that tearing.
We're just checking for tearing here.
Which is not evident.
Yeah.
It's clean.
So yeah, this demo I'm using the strobe effect. I could also be using the random effect, which is more like a lightning burst, or we could be using the emergency, or you might be running your own effect through the console. So that doesn't matter as long as we've got sync, as long as you've got the green bar up here and you've done your calibrate step, then you can shoot basically anything without it, without having a torn frame. So that's kind of the first use case, torn frames. We'll go now into doing a flash frame, so like a frame accurate strobing effect. And for this, we're actually going to use 2 vortexes, so I'll show you how to connect, to distribute the sync to more than one fixture. And it's very simple. To connect another fixture, we're going to come out of the DMX through. So this cable's running over now to my next fixture. On the menu here, we go down to Advanced, Sync Options, and then we're choosing Send Sync via DMX. So when we choose this, it sends the processed sync signal, so the calibration offset that we just did has been applied to it. That's why you don't need to do calibration on any of the other units. So we choose that. It gives a little warning saying that DMX is now disabled because this port's now being overridden for sync. So if you are controlling it, you now need to use streaming ACN or CRMX. So we'll just accept that and go back. On this fixture over here, actually I'll take my DMX cable, we'll need that. It's not going to work. No.
You're going to have to switch to CRMX or stream ACN.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, you can't run both over the same cable, unfortunately. So we're going to go in DMX on the back. On this fixture, we're choosing advanced again, sync options, and we're choosing receive sync via DMX. So you'd need to do this on any fixture that you've daisy chained for sync. So we select that. Again, it gives you the little warning that DMX is disabled, but we can now see that syncs come up here, 200 frames a second. So for the effect we're going to do a, we're going to flash one of the fixtures 1 frame red, and this fixture 1 frame blue. So I'll just go in here and choose, this one's going to be blue. And then we're going to go to our effects mode and choose the flash frames effect. This is the one that lets you accurately do 1 frame or 2 or more per shutter, per frame. So we'll select that one. On the back here, we've got off level. So this allows you to set like a background level. If you have that at 0, it's just going to be dark on the off frames. We have the number of frames we want to flash it on. That can be between 1 and 255. In this case, we're going to have 1 frame on, we're going to have 1 frame off, and our offset on this fixture is going to be 1. So on the other fixture, I'll set the offset to 0, and then this one's going to be 1, which means it's going to pick up every second frame. Yes, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's still 1 frame. So if you're doing it at 800, that's the same. So we'll set our light on here. And on this fixture here, I'm going to do the same thing. I'll just choose the flash frames effect. 1 frame on, 1 frame off, offset of 0, and I'll just make that color to be red. So you can switch here between showing that the color mode screen and the effects mode screen using those 2 quick keys. So we have sync, we've set up our effect. We'll roll this at 200 frames a second, and then we'll do it again at 800.
Yeah, it's kind of cool, just worth noting that with the Phantom there, you can't see that red light. It just looks like the blue ones on Chanel, because it's obviously synced. It's kind of trippy. But yeah. I'll take a couple of seconds of that at 200 frames.
All right. You rolling?
Actually, should we do a bit of a movement?
Yeah, can you count in?
Yep. I'll roll up in 3, 2, 1, go.
Cool.
All right, cool.
Thank you.
Thanks. All right, I'll play that back at 25 frames a second. And then I'll just go through frame by frame so you can see. I'll pause it there. That's 1 frame at a time.
So yeah, you can see we've exactly got 1 frame for each fixture.
It's really clean, and there's obviously no tearing because it's synced, but yeah, it's just that clean look, it's good.
Right, now we'll do the same thing. We'll crank the frame rate up to 800.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll leave let's leave the
shutter
at 180.
Yep.
I'm just going to cancel that effect.
Just going live again.
So is the camera now 180?
Camera's at 180 degrees, 800 frames per second.
Okay, I'll just show you on the back of the screen here, it's still saying 200 frames a second because the camera obviously didn't drop out when it changed shutter speed. The sync signal kept coming. Now the Vortex locks on to sync when it first occurs. So if you change the shutter speed, then you need to pull the sync and reconnect it so that the Vortex will lock back onto that sync signal. So now we should have 800. We've got 800 on the screen. And we'll come around and we'll run our calibration process again. All right, as I adjust the sync phase, what you can see now is we can't calibrate. I can't get that black bar to totally fill up the screen. And that the reason is that it's down to the scan time of the sensor. So it's sort of a camera limitation in a way. We can only use certain shutter angles. There's like a maximum shutter angle you can use per frame rate. So at 800 frames a second, we've done some testing. We can actually only get to about a 50-degree shutter.
So I'll go down to, we're at 180 degrees now on the shutter angle. If I go down to 80 as an example, you can see it gets me closer, but not quite. But yeah, like Sasha said, we found that 50 degrees gets us there.
So 50 degrees, you can just calibrate it, right? It's close, but you can do it. And at the higher, larger shutter angles, the camera sensor's scanning for more time. It's open longer. And there comes a situation where the camera sensor is scanning continuously. There's no break. And that's why we can't calibrate. So anyway, we have calibrated at 800 frames a second now. So we're going to go back and run that same flash frames effect. I'll plug back in. I just unplugged the DMX while we did that so the other light wasn't going crazy. I'll plug that back in. And I'm just going to resync again to lock the first frame.
Now that we've changed the shutter angle.
Right, so should we run that at 800 frames a second?
Yep. I'll count you inch now. 3, 2, 1, go.
All right. We're going to re-record that?
Yeah, I'll re-record that now, sorry. 3, yeah. 3, 2, 1. All right, got that. I'll play that back at 25 frames now.
So the little pause you see in the playback there, that's a part of the playback mechanism, not a glitch in the,
I
in the frame.
I was just skipping through there. But I'll go through frame by frame just so you can see that. At 800 frames, 50 degrees on the shutter angle. That's going through frame by frame, one frame at a time.
So what we'll do, that's quite a hectic effect when you play it back. obviously we've got control over the number of frames. So to make that a bit less crazy, I'm going to change that to 6 frames. 6 frames on and 6 frames off. And I'll do the same thing on this fixture over here. Actually, because we've changed, so we're doing 6 frames on, 6 frames off. And I'm going to change the offset to 6 as well, because we've had 6 frames on this fixture, and then we want this one to kick in on frame 7, so we've got an offset here of 6. Now we can start to see these flashing a little bit more before it seemed like they were just on constantly, but now they're you're starting to notice the flash. Because we've changed the frames on and the offset on the units, again, we just have to reconnect the sync, which allows them to lock onto the first frame, so the offset's going to be right. Otherwise, you may end up with them, the second one not actually being correctly offset at 6 frames. So you might find when you're messing around a lot with this, you're going to have to be removing sync and putting it back in just to sort of get that first frame alignment. So let's run another little sequence on that.
Yep, so I'll count you in, Chanel. 3, 2, 1, go. All right, I've got that. I'll play that back at 25 frames again. And then I'll go through frame by frame, and I'll count them out actually, just so you can see. So let's go to the first red frame. There we go, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 frames. Next one should be blue. Yep.
Is it? It is, yes. Yeah.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then red. Yep.
And if you wanted a dark frame in between to change that effect, you could increase the frames off number on each fixture. So we could make that higher and then change with the offset on the second one, and then you'll get a dark frame in between as well. So there's a bit of frame counting that you have to do to get the effect to look right. So that's with 2 fixtures. We're now going to go to 4 fixtures, and we're going to run a motion sequence. So I've already set these 2 up in the background here. They have got the receive sync via DMX enabled, and we are using, for this effect, we're going to have 6 frames on. So similar timing, we're going to have 6 frames on and 18 frames off. So we've got this one on for 6, and then we've got another 6, 12, 18 frames that this one has to be off because the other 3 are doing their thing. So this one's set up. This one also will set with 6 frames on, 6 frames, or 18 frames off. I'll change the color. We're just going to run just a plain 5600 Kelvin on this. And I'll plug in the DMX output to the other 2 fixtures. And yeah, so this one's been set up with 6 frames on, 18 off, and an offset of 12. This one's got an offset of 6. That one's got an offset of 18. I'll set this one also just to white. Right, so yeah, these should fire 6 frames in sequence, and it's kind of going to go around in a ring. We don't need to recalibrate because we're still shooting the same shutter speed, we're still shooting the same shutter angle. I do need to just reconnect sync. And now these are flashing, so let's capture this.
So I'll count you in, Chanel. 3, 2, 1, go. All right, got that? So that was still at 800 frames at 50 degrees shutter. I'll just play it back to start at 25 frames there.
So this is obviously a fairly coarse resolution. We've only got 4 fixtures, but you know, if you had a larger array, you could get some quite tight sort of motion movement.
I'll go through frame by frame if you like.
So obviously that's our front right fixture there. That's the first frame it's on. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then it switches over to left front fixture. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Then the rear left. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then our far right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Should come back to the front now. Yep. So it's a nice clean 6 frames each.
Yeah. So you can expand this, obviously more fixtures. You've got quite a lot of control. So I've been doing this on the back of the unit. You do have access to all these settings also via DMX on any of the modes that have got the effects channels in the mode. You have access to the flash frames effect where you can set the frames on, you can set the frames off and the offset. There's also a Calibrate sync effect accessible via DMX, so you can control the phase on one of the channels. Currently on version 2.0.1, you have to do it manually. When we release the next version that's got the control channel, we will actually have a control channel setting that lets you interrupt the sync. So that will be one of the control channel options. If you have multiple units linked together and they're all set to Calibrate sync mode, say you've done this via DMX, you've grabbed them all together and you've all put them in Calibrate sync, you should be able to, the units that are set to receive sync via DMX, they will ignore the Calibrate sync because all the calibration phase happens in the master unit. But you could pan around the room, you know, with your camera and check each fixture was behaving as you expect, you know, that you can't see the LEDs. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. You can change intensities, you can change color. That's no problem. It's just if you change the number of frames on or off, if you're using that flash frames effect, then you need to resync so they all lock on to the correct frame 1. Exactly the same in the Vortex 4. Yeah, correct. You can change it via DMX. So these settings are accessible on the effects channels. Yeah, so I don't know if you can see this slide okay. This is showing one of the modes that's got effects channels. So that's effects channels on 9 through to 12. Can you just show the next slide? you roll to the next slide, Mark?
Sync flash effect.
Yeah.
And your parameters for that are to be able to change the frame and offsets, right?
So yeah, here's the flash frames effect, what the channels do on that. So this lets you change those parameters. Yeah, but just keep in mind again that if you change the number of frames or the offset, then you'll need to refresh sync so they all latch on to frame 1 again. Yeah, great question. We're looking into it. There's a bunch of timing requirements, especially when you're shooting high speed to get the latency down. You know, you need to be in the microsecond sort of area.
Problems with like switches that can't even go that fast.
Yeah. That's the challenge, is getting the latency, network latency down. You could, and you could take the sync output from the camera and use like a T-junction and then run multiple master units. If you wanted to run two separate boxes, for example, each with 20 heads in it. Yeah, so you could split and distribute the sync signal that's coming out of the camera quite easily. Yes, so that's the easiest setup is when you're using a Phantom and it's got the sync output, because we can take that directly. If you're using a camera that doesn't have sync output and it only has like a Genlock input, then you're going to need to use some other form of reference clock. So in this case, I've got the ambient locket box. So this is providing our master sync reference signal. You're a bit more limited using this because you can only run with the standard frame rates that the box supports. So in this case, it's like 23.98 through to 60 frames a second. So you can't shoot, say, 200 frames using a device like this. So for the setup, using a locket box, we're going to go locket box through to a BNC splitter. One end of that's going to go into the camera, and we've got a Komodo here we're going to demo this on. And then the other end is going into the Creamsource Flash Bandit. So this takes the video sync signal and converts it through to just a regular kind of TTL level for the fixture. So we'll set this up. We've got sync coming out of the ambient box, going into the sync generator. The other piece of equipment you'll need for the Vortex is this converter cable that just takes the accessories socket, and it's got the right plug for the Flash Bandit. We are going to release a Flash Bandit that plugs directly in, but for now, you have to use this little adapter box. So right now, we've got sync. We can see this little blue light's flashing. We're still running our flash frames demo from before, but now we can see on the screen here, it's 24 frames a second instead of 800, but we're still running that cycle effect. And on the camera side, on the Komodo and a lot of the other smaller cameras don't have a dedicated Genlock input, so we've had to use the little Komodo expander module on the back, which has a Genlock input. we plug that in there. The master source is now the locket box, and we're slaving the camera to the locket box and the light to the locket box. So it's a little bit more hardware involved, and you're a bit more limited on what frame rates you can do. But overall, it's the same process to calibrate. So totally you can play with this without the camera connected. So I can lose the camera from that plug, go back in, and now I can test. I can see that I've got sync. The only thing I can't do is check calibration, but I can see now, like if you go back to the wide shot of this room, Mark, you can see the fixtures are flashing in that sequence. So you can mess with stuff without actually having a camera and using this as your generator. Great, thanks a lot.
It's a wrap.
It's a wrap. Woo.